Hi, welcome back to another video. Today I want to present to you the fantasy variation in the Caro-Kann with both the master lines and the Patzer lines that you might encounter in your online games. So the Caro-Kann starts after the moves e4, c6, d4, d5, and the fantasy variation is this unusual move f3. And to motivate this, let's see what the ideal setup is that white is trying to achieve. So we have the Caro-Kann and then the fantasy variation. But if we think about e4, e5, knight f3, f6, then black is hopelessly lost because this f-pawn push is weakening the king too much. But in the Caro-Kann, actually all the pawns are sort of here on the queen side, and there isn't actually a way for example, the queen to get out at the moment. So white is actually fine. And if we put on the engine, yeah, we see it's actually completely fine for white. But obviously you have to know what you're doing. So what's sort of the ideal setup for white? So let's say black takes, white will recapture, black plays e5. Let's I will say in a minute why this is important. Then white plays knight f3. Then black takes, white develops further, black develops, white castles. Black tries to have sort of a threat here against the king on this diagonal, but black is already very lost. I mean, you can see the win percentage down here at 64%. Yeah, let me show you. 64% win percentage for white in the games I'm looking at are sort of games of 2000 or higher rating in rapid, classical or correspondence, so slow games that are or slow-ish games that are high rated, if you consider 2000 lead chess a high rating. Because after knight g5, I drew some arrows here, so you can see the green arrows are all uniting on f7. So white has a ton of pressure on f7, and after this red move over here, this e5 move, this knight is also getting kicked away, so there's even more pressure on f7. So even if black castles now, they're actually hopelessly lost. So one example would be castles, bishop takes, black takes back, and if they take with the king, you know, there's just two ways to lose. I mean, one way is queen h5, one way is with e5, and after king goes back, for example, you just collect this extra piece, and you just up a rook for a bishop. So you're already completely winning, and you know the rest of black's king side is also getting destroyed. So that's sort of the ideal setup that black wants. So I've basically separated this into three types of responses. So one is accepting the gambit, one is declining it, and one is counter gambiting essentially. Or sorry, not accepting. Okay, accepting the gambit is not the correct term. I meant accepting the e-pawn. This isn't really a gambit since the e-pawn is protected by the f-pawn. But yeah, I mean accepting the e-pawn, declining the e-pawn, or counter gambiting with your own e-pawn. So if I can show this, so the accepting looks like this, declining can look like this, for example, or counter gambiting looks like this. And I will discuss all of these in the next chapters. So chapter number 3 is accepted without the critical move e5. So in this position, after black accepts this variation, after black accepts the e-pawn, then they basically have to play e5. If you look at the engine over here, e5 is the only okay move. And if you look at the win rates, e5 is the only one where black still has a chance. But as you can also see, more than 4,000 games here went knight f6. So might be worth a minute to talk about knight f6, because even, I mean, 2000 isn't really such a good level, but it still played a lot at 2000 level. So let's talk about it. So after knight f6, the problem is that, or like why is this position strong for white? Because white is threatening to go here to e5 and then kick the knight on f6. So the knight can't really develop naturally. So white is already gaining a ton of space, and this is actually similar to the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann, but the difference is that in that variation black can undermine the white pawn structure very well with moves like c5, for example, which aren't so practical here. So let's see how this could play out. So knight f6, as we discussed, most common move here is e5, and more principle to very principled to go for the advantage. And right, so I mean, if they just go knight g8, I don't think anyone does that. You just win a free move. Knight d5 is more looks promising, but of course this can be hit with another pawn. You can already see it. It's just hit with c4. And then the knight goes back to b6, for example. I mean, c7 isn't much better either. And now white can just develop. If you develop with knight f6, then you get this pin here. So maybe it's a bit smarter to avoid it by playing knight c3. And yeah, the most common move here in the online database is bishop f5. I don't know if there are any master games, no. But it's bishop f5, and yeah, that is suboptimal placement of the bishop. And after knight f3, yeah, the evaluation is jumping around a bit. I think this is just to do with different depths and stuff. I don't think this has anything, this is any deeper meaning. So it's very good for white, I think. And yeah, the most common move here is e6, finishing development. Here we could, for example, activate the queen with the bishop trade. And after bishop e7, preparing to castle, we can activate the rook on this open line with another castle. And after that, for example, knight e4 is very strong, which is just, as you can see by the arrows, it's just threatening all sorts of stuff on the king side. The bishop is also going in here, so g4 is an idea, so black is almost hopelessly lost. And I actually have an example game here. This is not a master game, this is just a random sort of game that I found in this variation. Right, so everything as we discussed, and here black played okay, let's hope I could cut this video together. So what I was trying to say was, here's this random online game I found in this position, and after this move castles, white found the sacrifice here, and if black takes, white can take the pawn, attacking the bishop. In the game f5 was played, but even after this, I think there was another sacrifice here. So if white takes here, black takes here, white takes, yeah, black tries to take here, this is checkmate. And I think actually everything is checkmate in this position. Well, you have to give up the queen basically, because otherwise, this is going to be checkmate. So just an example of how badly this can go. So in the actual game, they didn't even try to save the rook. They just went for f5, and yeah, I don't know what they're doing. Yeah, they didn't really see a way to stop a rook g1. So that's something that can happen to you if you're not careful. So yeah, that's what happens if you don't play e5. But yeah, there was also another common move in the database, well, not that common, but e6 here, and it's a similar story. So knight f3, because it can't be pinned. c5 here is an interesting try for black, so there's still some counterplay here, but after, let's say, d5 trades, its white is still better, but not, I mean, at least knight f6 can be played by black, so it's not completely awful. I think, yeah. Yeah, so let's see something that's maybe a little bit better for black if they do accept the e-pawn. So everything as normal, and here basically the only move is f takes e4. So yeah, I would recommend playing that as white. And I think I'm more interested in this position from black because I'm playing the Caro-Kann, but it's also very interesting from white's position, especially this chapter, because white is just crushing. So I've identified one line that's also some GMs play like Ali Reza, but most of the other lines white is basically completely winning. So you can maybe play this if you remember everything from this video, if you remember all the theory, but otherwise it's still completely losing in most lines. So you should really only go into this with white. Yeah. So e5. So I made a little list of why e5 is important. So it's fighting for the center, which usually the d5 pawn does in the Caro-Kann, but we traded that away. We threaten queen h4, which goes after the king and maybe forks this pawn in a lot of lines, especially Patzer lines. And we also prevent e4, which is the other idea that I talked about. So we have e4, e5, which is preventing the knight from going here. So the knight, so one of the goals that black has is actually establishing a knight or a safe knight on f6. So let's talk about the Patzer lines here. So knight f3 is basically the only legitimate move. So if you look at the Masters games, look at 338 games with knight f3. I don't think I need to say anything more than that, but on online games you will sometimes see other moves. So for example, you might see takes, and it's not loading, but basically the idea is that you can queen trade and black is completely fine. Or you can play queen h4 even at this line. I was thinking about another line. So what I meant to say was in all of these other moves you likely can just play queen h4 and and this is why knight f3 is so important, because it has to stop that move. So if pawn takes pawn, then queen h4 exists, and yeah, most of these lines, for example, after king d2, they lose a pawn. And if they are very bad, then they might play g3, and then after we take the pawn, they actually get the rook in the corner. So you're actually completely winning in this position. But I don't think most people would play g3. Well, still some people do. But yeah, let's also look at the similar positions of c3, also blunder. After c3 you have the exact same tactic. And after d5 you also have the exact same tactic. I don't know why this is -6 in this instance. I don't know. Anyway, after knight f3, which is the only correct move for white, there are two main continuations. So if you look at how often in lead chess games this was played, so e takes d and bg4 are commonly played, and the other lines aren't as common. Although bishop e6 is also interesting. Let's look at bishop e6. So this is actually something that I saw Naroditsky recommend on his masterclass speedrun. And what I think the idea is after knight takes, we again have this fork on h4. So We can once again win this pawn in the middle here. And if that doesn't happen, so if they try to take this free pawn the other way, then you just get a queen trade and a sort of equalish endgame. Although I think black has a slightly higher win rate. Not sure. And after c3, you just have a normal game after I think knight f6. I'm actually curious why they can't take now. Okay, because they're also threatening to take. But okay, after you get this key move knight f6 in, which is sort of the whole goal of these variations. So talking about the other two variations, so there's e takes d and bg4, and both of them actually kind of look fine. Both of them actually have an engine evaluation, as you can see, that isn't too different. So, but I would actually argue that e takes d, which is the most common move, is a blunder. So it's very misguided, and the reason is it leads to a lot of lines where black is just completely hopelessly lost, and bishop g4 is much stronger. And the reason why ed isn't scoring higher for white is, I think, because white often doesn't know how to punish it properly. So bg4, I think, is an appropriate move. ed is just bad. So let's see what happens after ed. So one reason why you would play a Gambit, or one reason why you play the fantasy, is because you want quick development. So you just continue developing here, which is by far the most common move. And yeah, something that I also see a lot, that I've seen also a lot of in my games, is just queen takes d4. So this is obviously just garbage, because it's just giving away all of white's advantage. So there's a queen trade, and then there's then it's just equal. I mean, the win rate is even better, and the engine is even better for black, but yeah, it's not the reason why you would play the fantasy. So don't take this pawn, but go for bishop c4. And there's a blunder here, which is important to discuss also for the other line, which is bishop g4. Right, so it's important not to mess up your lines, because bishop g4 on the other line was the best move, but now it's a complete blunder. And the reason is white has a tactic on f7. So after we take on f7 here, if the king does take, then we have this this forking the bishop and the king, obviously. And maybe it's not completely obvious yet how to convert this. So the important part is taking with the queen here, because then you have more threats. For example, you have threats on this e6 square, and you have also threats on this h5 square. So this is why it's more accurate to take with the queen. And one thing that happened in one of my games was knight f6 here. Then yeah, once again you have this strong queen e6 threat. After queen blocks, you attack with the queen here, and then you take, and then you just have a fork here. And that's how I won one of my games by resignation. And I think if bishop takes, we just have checkmate, I think. Yes. Yeah, so another line is maybe knight d7, and this is, I mean, as you can see, you can still lose this with white, but what you can do is queen h5. After g6, you have this tactic that's probably very common and very familiar to you, that you have in chess, which is having this vision on the rook. So the queen is sort of pinning the rook here, so you know, you can just take this pawn and they can't really recapture. What they can try to do is be tricky and develop the knight to f6 here, and then you actually have to go back to, and this is an important difference, you actually have to go back to h3 instead of h4, because if you go to h4, this rook will swing around and attack you. So, you know, as you can see, queen h3 winning, queen h4 is only equal. So, you know, you can still completely lose this position. And yeah, after rook g8, I have some more moves for some reason. You can take with the knight, the other knight can take, and then you can castle. Okay, now you should be able to convert this, I think. Right. Now, what's the other move? The second most common move is knight f6, and according to the engine, it's best, but I don't know how they... I think black is borderline losing, because this is sort of the position we discussed in the beginning. After castles, we just have a lot of pressure. Let's just say bishop c5 here, and then we have just this knight g5 idea, and we have once again everything piling up on the f7 square. So even if black castles, they are not safe. This is important if you play this with white, so you can see there are two obvious moves here, which are knight takes and bishop takes. And knight takes is the most common, and I've seen high-rated players play this, but this is technically, you can see this is technically better for black, because there is technically counterplay for black. So let's go into the knight takes variation. Oh, no, let's go into the bishop takes variation, which is the proper one. So once again, as we discussed in the beginning, the thing is you would take with the rook, and you can see the advantage growing, and after the king takes, you just have queen h5 or e5, and you're just completely winning. But if you play knight takes, they do have this queen e7 move. So if you paid attention in the other line, there also was a queen e7 highlighted, but I mean, just look at how often different moves were played in this line. You can see no one is able to find queen e7 because it's just too ridiculous. But if you do know queen e7, maybe you have a chance here. So after queen e7, white actually doesn't have any good discoveries. So let's just check the engine best move, knight e6, and black can just block with the bishop. And then it's not really clear how white proceeds here. Yeah, queen e7, very difficult move to spot. As you can see, no one spotted it, or like 3 people out of 81 spotted it here. So yeah, it's black is still into a lot of trouble, even if they play queen e7, in my opinion. But yeah, queen e7 sort of attacks this pawn, threatens to actually take it, and maybe it prepares some counterattacks down here, maybe later on. Not entirely sure what the situation was here. But even if you know queen e7, I wouldn't recommend going into this line. Right, and so now let's discuss the other ways that black has to lose here. So bishop b4 looks reasonable maybe, but c3 here is obvious, and dc is also obvious in quotes, but it's actually completely losing, because after dc you have this sort of Eric Rosen trap-like thing. So there's this famous trap that Eric Rosen publicized where you can capture on f7 here. If the king takes, then obviously you win the queen. And if the king moves here, then what did I analyze? You have queen b3, and the reason why queen b3 is strong is it prevents discovered attacks. So if black tries to have a discovered attack, you can just take the attacker with check. So yeah, some people didn't find that, and black can actually just win by promoting in some of these lines. But yeah, with very patza moves, let's say. Bishop e6 here is another try that I found. It's interesting, but I don't think it's very good. So takes is obvious. Then castles. According to the engine, the only move that doesn't lose on the spot is knight f6. But White again has the obvious e5, and now the only move that doesn't lose is knight e4. So I don't think anyone, I don't know who would play knight e4 in this position. Apparently only 12 people out of 83. But yeah, I don't think, I think only the engine would find this move. Like, I don't think this is very good for black. Like, just look at this 3.7. If they play some other move, like this is completely losing, right? If they don't play knight f6, it's also over 3 points. So it's completely losing. Right, so where did we stop? Did we go over all of these here? Bishop g4. Yeah, bishop e6, I went over bishop e6 in the beginning, right? So we went over this entire block here. So what do I recommend instead? And what do some of the super GMs play? So one move here is bishop g4. And this can lead to some decent lines for black. I think the only move I analyze here is bishop c4 because the other ideas are similar in the deeper down the line. So bishop c4 is the most commonly played move here in the Patzer games, let's say. And black has this interesting move, which you can see even is better for black. This is amazing. We have a move which is better for black, which is 97. So what 97 does is it just protects this pawn in the center and prevents this bishop takes f7 strategies. And it allows you to develop to f6 naturally later on. So let's see what happens if we don't play 97, which is again just carnage. So common move here is bishop takes f3. This is a little bit unclear, so queen takes, and then it's unclear how this proceeds. So black can try many things. They can try developing with knight f6, queen f6, queen h4 check, and then it's unclear how white will respond. So I think it's an unclear position, even though the white win rate is much better, and the engine thinks obviously white is much in favor, but yeah, when 2000s touch queens, then nothing good is going to happen. So knight f6, which I discussed was the key move. If this is tried instantly, then once again, it's not preventing the strategy from occurring. So, you know, yeah, I drew these arrows again in case you forgot. So, yeah, this is just completely, you can see 77% win rate is just completely winning for white. So, but what about this knight d7 move? So we are covering the center, and there are two moves here for white. So castles, which doesn't do anything, so it just allows black to develop, and c3 is once again putting pressure on the position. So c3 is the interesting move to look at here. And why is this interesting? So the intent of c3 is queen b3, which I drew this arrow for, and then f7 is just an attack, and it's actually somewhat hard to defend this, you know. So typical idea is maybe knight h6, but it's not working in this case because the bishop is staring at it. So one better plan that I looked at was you can develop the bishop to d6 and then cover with the queen. So there's two different moves actually. So there's bishop h5, which you can see is somewhat rare, but in the master games it's actually the most common move. So it's more move that a master would see, is because after bishop h5 the bishop is actually backwards protecting this pawn. So this is maybe an unusual move to spot if you've never seen it, but now that you've seen it, maybe this could be an option for black. But I think bishop d6 is more maybe principled because you are actually developing all your pieces. So after bishop d6, white follows through with the queen b3 plan, Right, once again, if white castles, there isn't much danger for black. So, yeah, as we originally discussed, queen e7 was our original plan. And this is where it becomes interesting, because white can actually just capture this pawn over here. And they are temporarily up a pawn. Most of the time you're probably very familiar with this. If queen captures on b2 or b7 or something, then there's obviously this rook move which can counterattack the queen and take here. But at the moment this is not possible. So let me try to illuminate why. So you can see the most common move here is queen takes on c6. Actually still master games following. Okay, still 2 master games. So why is it a bad idea to take on, yeah, it's a bad idea because this is protecting. I was thinking about another line, but what I was trying to say is it's a bad idea to go down here, because the queen can go up here and check the black king. But this is, I was confusing this with another line. So bishop takes f3 is the most common move here, because there's no longer a pin, because the queen is gone, so there's nothing to do here. So just getting rid of this piece is fine. And it's also making it uncomfortable for white to castle queen side. I mean, you don't really want to stand in this line of fire here. And finally on move 11, black does get knight f6, and so you can finally develop your knight to the f6 square, which was quite a battle. And if we take stock of this final position, you can see there is a very good win rate here, 71%. 71% of games here are won by black. And the reason is black will castle, then they will put the rook on this open line, and they will have a lot of pressure down this line, maybe pressuring to take this pawn here, maybe pressuring to give a check here, pressuring to take the bishop, maybe pressuring to check. Maybe they will be pressuring to take this pawn. This black queen is directly opposite this king and can have a pin on it, or this queen can come here and attack this king. So there's a lot of potential here for black, but you do have to remember that black is down 2 pawns. So you do have to actually act on your more increased activity. Yeah, so the most common move here, as you can see, there aren't many games here. So the most common move was bishop g5 with 5 games. Although, as you can see, it's very thinning out. So there are many different things I think that white is going to do in this position. Let's say bishop g5. This is somewhat misguided. Earlier the engine was saying -2 or something. The reason is obviously this was protecting this pawn, and yeah, it's just and it's also not protecting the c1 square after you exchange it. So let's say castles and bishop e3, just to avoid sort of both of them being on the same line, or I mean avoiding the taking. Yeah, and this is what I meant. So if you try to take this free pawn now, then you'd get hit with queen c8 check. So maybe even a blunder. So yeah, you aren't allowed to take it too early. So first castle, and now black's position is actually looking good. So after bishop e3, trying to protect the pawn, we bring the rook to the open file. This is looking very strong, these 2 open rook files. Queen a6 was the move played in 3 games. Now pawn takes is an option. After pawn takes back, we have threats of coming down here to check and pick up this rook. So 2 out of 2 games here went h6, which is obviously bad, because I actually don't know why this isn't. Yeah, I mean, look at this. One of the best moves is just castling, just ignoring the bishop that you're going to lose, right? So it's already very bad for white. And knight c3 is also just ignoring the bishop, just losing it for nothing. Maybe you still do have 2 pawns, but it's if black knows what they're doing, they should be winning this position. So now let's discuss this Gambit or counter Gambit idea. So we have the usual Caro-Kann opening. Okay, Leech is lagging for some reason. Please just let me move. Okay. Yes, f3, and the idea is to play e5 here. And there's also, you can also play queen b6 here, which is also similar. So there's potential to create mame on the board, but it's gimmicky if white knows how to defend. So you will actually know pretty quickly if white knows this, because I mean, overwhelmingly, which actually surprised me, but overwhelmingly the main move here is to take. Except the Gambit is like 85% or maybe 80 to 85% of games. So we're only going to look at that line, and the idea is to bring both of your diagonal attackers on this diagonal with f7. So queen here, bishop here, and just stare down on this square. And if they know the main line, which is knight c3, which is more commonly played, they're actually probably fine, I would say. In the Masters game, yeah, most people play knight c3, and no one plays e takes d, but in the Leech's database, a lot of players play e takes d, and in that case, you will actually be better, as you can see by the 64% win rate. So we follow up the plan with queen b6. Once again, cd is just garbage. I don't know why you would play this. It's not garbage, but at least not in the spirit of the position or the opening. And now this threat is actually very serious, and the only real way to stop it is knight h3. Because you're actually having 2 threats. You're having one threat is checking here, and the second threat is just taking this, because you have 2 attackers and actually just 1 defender of this piece. So let's look at queen e2. Queen e2, you just take the knight if the board will load. Yeah, you just take the knight, and black is better, although not that much better, because if you look counter material, white has 2 pawns, black has a knight, so it's still, you can still see there's still chances for white. But it's, let's say white continues with e6, you just take, and knight f6 is possible. I like knight e7 better, because it's just making 100% sure that we can castle. Okay, so queen e2 is a patzer move, so the only move in one oh yeah, there's also one move which is interesting, which is if they see that this knight is attacked, then they can maybe play knight e2, and that's a mate in 2, which has occurred 10 times, which you execute like this, and then this is just checkmate. So that would be very epic as black, but I mean, there's a sort of 6% chance this will happen, so maybe sometimes you will get lucky. And knight h3 is the most common move and the only move in that position, and then you can still renew this threat by taking with the bishop. They have to recapture more or less, and then you have this check here, and after king e2, there's a few different lines. Black can't really, in my opinion, get more of an advantage immediately. They have to be happy with the advantage they have. So one line that I looked at was bishop h4, but one white can just try to block this queen f2 check. So black does get this pawn in here, but white isn't, white is still fine in this position. There's bishop g1, just trying the same idea from behind basically, and it's maybe a bit hard to see, but you have to find queen e1 check. But yeah, as you can see, black is potentially better in this position. Then there's also c takes d here, just reclaiming one pawn. But white can just take it back, and you can try to develop here. But after knight c3, okay, it's actually saying this is actually strong. Okay, never mind. Maybe black is actually better in this line, but all of these lines sort of presuppose that they do take with e. They do take the second pawn, which is a mistake that not everyone will make. Right, looks like 30% of people will make it, so it can be interesting to hope for this move. But yeah, it's a 30% chance. The other move that I looked at was bishop d3, and the line continues with queen b6, knight e2. Now if they check, white has king f1, and bishop h4 is once again threatening checkmate, but no one fell for this, so g3 maybe, bishop h3, king e1, bishop e7. I'm not, you can see that the score isn't amazing, so I'm not convinced of this for black. So let's go into the actual main line, which is playing knight c3 check, knight c3 here, and queen b6 can mostly easily be met with knight to a4, because this is just a classic fork. So I recommend playing this with white, and one patsa move that you can see is the most common move here, which is actually not very effective. It's just putting the bishop here. And after king e2, black is basically forced to find queen b4, because I mean, black has to stay on this diagonal to protect the bishop. So these two squares are taken by the knight, and this square is taken by the bishop. So this square is forced, and this square leads to a queen trade. So this is why bishop f2 isn't really effective in doing anything. So after queen takes, bishop takes, maybe bishop f4, for example, there isn't actually much that can be said about this position, except that white is slightly better again. So this is why I wouldn't go for this, but I would instead try out queen a5. Most common move here is c3, which protects the knight here diagonally from the queen. And now what you would do is you would exchange your bishop for the knight. This has the advantage that white can't castle short because they moved the rook. After continuation like d takes, maybe white tries to save the other pawn. Maybe they try to attack your pawn. Let's say bishop f4 to protect them. Black develops, and then a move like b4 is common here, and you can see two arrows here, two moves here, queen c7, which I don't like, because you're just giving up this pawn for free. And queen d5 is maybe a bit stronger, because after the queen trade, at least this pawn is protected. So, this position is not very convincing for black in my opinion, but as I said, so you're basically, this entire line is basically hoping that you get this blunder on move 5 of this e takes d5, which you should get decently. I mean, I said 30%, so, but other than that, I don't see the convincing win. And There's also queen b3 on move 3, so queen b6 on move 3, which was which Wikipedia said was mostly Joe Barber's idea. There's also similar ideas, but it plays slightly different. So one line that I looked at was knight c3, d takes now, f takes. This powerful move e5 is basically, which was the first move, and the other line is basically delayed now. Knight f3, which is different to the other line. After e takes d, knight takes. You can once again pressure with the bishop. There's once again this fork. Once again this check. After c3, you know, it's, I mean, the win percentages are actually pretty good on the queen b6 lines. You can maybe try this out, but yeah, I don't see too much of an advantage compared to the other line. They both seem pretty gimmicky. Maybe white falls for it, who knows. Anyway, it's something that you can maybe try and maybe report back if you have success with this line. But are the master games, or there are even some master games in this position. So I mean, it seems fine for the masters here. Okay, just not the line I would recommend, because the line I would recommend is this chapter 6 here, which is declining with e6. So this just starts in a very straightforward manner with e6 here, and this is sort of like this triangle system in the Slav defense. There's a semi-Slav system that you might be familiar with. So this has some advantages and disadvantages for black. So the advantage is black maintains the threat of taking here and checking here. So we'll actually see immediately how this can be useful, because in a lot of Patzer games this can actually be immediately exploited. This f3 pawn is ugly. This is sort of the entire point of e6, is you don't want to exchange and make this pawn happy because it's ugly at the moment, and if we can keep it ugly, this would be a great win for black. The disadvantage is white threatens e5, continues to threaten e5, so you can still not develop here, which you could do in the line where black played e5 that I showed at the beginning. And yeah, black doesn't have too many natural developing moves, but yeah, this is why you're watching this video, so you sort of know what to do. So there are many ways that white can immediately blunder here. So 4,602 people played knight c3, which is a good move, but a lot of people also played bishop d3, for example, which immediately loses to the tactic that I described. So d takes, f takes, and then sorry, yeah, this line you take this central pawn. If they play c4, then you have once again the strategy of takes. Well, let's say f takes, because it's the most common move, and then okay, it's not even saying queen h4 check, but let's say queen h4 check, and you once again win this pawn on e4. So this is obviously garbage. Bishop e3 is interesting, so I didn't put this down as a complete blunder, because the tactic doesn't exactly work here. So after d takes, e takes, queen h4, white can actually play g3 with the idea you lose this pawn, but let's say white plays queen e2. Usually if white plays g3 in this line, this is actually just losing the rook, but in this case it's actually not losing the rook. So you have to be very careful. Queen takes h1, most common move here, and winning for white. Why? Because after queen takes h1, bishop g2, so it looks like you're trapped until you notice that h2 is not protected and you think you're free. But after this check, which you have to respond to, white does get the queen. So very interesting line that bishop e3 is maybe setting up a trap more or less unintentionally. So you do have to be careful about thinking your opponent is bad and losing their rook. So yeah, if you look at win rate, so only knight c3 is convincing, and bishop e3 with the queen trap is sort of also convincing in quotes. But yeah, it's going for this one trick. E5, bishop d3, sort of c4, not really convincing. So let's look at the main line, knight c3. And why is knight c3 so strong? It protects this main pawn, so it just addresses these ideas directly that black has with playing queen h4 check. Right, so now if black plays queen h4 check, we have g3, and then they can only go back. Right. So here, for example, here there are basically two moves that I looked at multiply, which is bishop b4 and knight f6, which are the main moves. And the other lines are a bit rarer. So let's look at knight f6, because there's less to discuss here. So knight f6 is sort of the thing that I said you shouldn't get into, because it's being available for kicking with e5. But if you actually look closely at what's happening, after e5 there is knight f2 d7. Most natural move and most common move here is f4, which is bolstering the center, which is actually looking, actually also strong. But black then can solidly undermine it with c5, which is because there's a deep one here, right, which wasn't there in the other variation, in the accepted variations. So, and if you look, there's actually 575 games in this position and 42,000 games in this position. So this is because we're actually transposing into a mainline French defense position, and this is all well-known theory. So after knight f3, most common move knight c6, bishop e3, and yeah, there are many moves in this position, but this is just the mainline French position. So if you think you're comfortable with that, you can transpose into this after e5. The other move they could try is bishop g5, which is obviously threatening to go e5 and pinning the queen. To actually have master games, okay, there's actually master games here. So the most natural and most common move here is bishop e7, and after they do go e5, we just go back, we trade, I think this is obvious, and f4 to bolster the center, and this is fine. Maybe castling looks a little bit dangerous right now. I mean, this is sort of a French defense like this setup, so of course it does, but yeah, this is why castling isn't as common here, because it looks a bit dangerous, but black should objectively be fine here. Maybe try to create counterplay with a6, who knows. But yeah, the move that I actually wanted to discuss here is queen b6. Interesting. The reason is that it looks like it loses after bishop takes, because you have to ruin your pawn structure. But actually we have this little move order trick, or vision zook trick, which is taking on b2, and you're actually threatening to, if they remove the bishop, you're threatening to take the knight with check. So the 2 out of 2 moves here, 2 out of 2 games here went knight a4 and queen retreats, and you're actually still having this double threat on both of these things. But I think it's very hard to see if you haven't studied this. And as you can see, the evaluation is better for black. So let's say bishop h4, and then just queen takes, and yeah, black should be fine or even better. Okay, nothing is loading at the moment, I'm sorry. Okay, so basically the next thing I wanted to talk about was the move bishop b4 here, which was yes, in this position. Instead of knight f6, maybe you think this is giving black is giving white too much initiative. So bishop b4 is also a good alternative here. And this is hard to analyze because, as you can see, there are many moves which are sort of equally common. The one I went with for now is bishop f4, which is the most common line right now. I think I should maybe refresh the page or something. Okay, so bishop, yeah, let's analyze it with bishop f4 just for the sake of example. So once again, there's two moves here. There's knight f6, which leads to maybe similar complications as in the other line, except you know, the bishop has already moved to a different square. So knight f6 also completely fine. Let's just for the sake of argument say we want to avoid it and play knight e7. The most principled move here for white is trying to go for a castle queenside, because once again this pawn structure isn't exactly ideal and the king would be exposed on this diagonal, for example. So castle queenside is the most principled. This is also what master games do. So queen d3 or knight e2 both prepare castle queenside. Queen d3 prepares it directly. And here's a move that you maybe have to know if you want to play this, because I think it's important to notice as black, which is b6. So let's say if black just develops lazily, then you know how is this bishop getting out? How are you creating counterplay on the queen side? There's not really good answers to these questions. How are you preparing c5? Well, I guess it's a little bit preparing c5, but yes, I don't really think this is convincing, even though the engine thinks it's fine. I think b6 is important to know here because b6 prepares developing the bishop to this square a6, which is hitting the queen, and you know, this knight needs to protect the bishop, obviously. And this would actually develop this piece very well, and it's also preparing b6, is also preparing c5, and this knight is also preparing to jump into g6 to hit this bishop. So you know, maybe bishop f4 wasn't the most the best developing move. So let's say white plays knight e2, which is quite natural. Bishop a6 threatens the queen. Queen can try to pin herself on d2 or just go to e3. After castles, there is long castles. c5, as we discussed, can be played instantly. Maybe white will play a3. Bishop would take, queen or knight can take. I guess queen takes is more common also in the master games. Here there's 17 master games with queen takes, 3 games with knight takes. And yeah, I stopped analyzing here. So as I said, there's 17 master games here. I have there's this game of Jan Nepomniachtchi, who you probably are familiar with. He has 2 games in this with white. You can look at these if you want. So actually very interesting. So bishop takes e2 seems to win for white, and knight e7 seems to be drawing or even better for black. So I don't know what's going on here. They both seem fine. But yeah, this is sort of the master theory. So overall, I think this variation is, this e6 variation is very solid. This is obviously a very solid position. There are many ways, you know, to have queen h4 tactics where you just outright win. You can transpose into the French if you want. You can have this, try to go for this queen b6 trick here. I think this is pretty solid. You know, the accepted variation is also pretty solid if you go for the line that I described, but it's, as I said, it can be very dangerous if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So going into this next chapter, there's another way to, this is the final chapter, there's another way to decline this, but just as a little spoiler, I don't exactly recommend this for black, so it's a little bit challenging to play, and it's actually not clear how black goes for an advantage. So this is reached after e4, c6, d4, d5, f3, and then g6. And this is like the Gurgenitsa system, except it's the Gurgenitsa system usually isn't played against f3. So this is interesting. So you're trying to develop to g7 as I draw out the arrow here, but you also have this problem of the pawn getting to e5. So white just has a strong pawn chain. After f4 they have just this very amazing pawn chain, and your bishop is actually not doing very much about it. So I think it's very challenging to play. I don't know, it doesn't have an amazing win rate. I don't think any system has, except for e6. Yeah, so if we maybe try to compare, so this accepted variation, as you can see, it's pretty miserable for black. And even those wins are probably just some blunder in the end game or something. Like it's like it's not very convincing. I wouldn't go into this with black, unless you want to play this one exact line that I showed. e6 has the most convincing win rate here at 45% of the main lines, and this is why I would recommend it. Knight f6, as I once again stated, is just a complete error. I stated this at the beginning, and g6 also just doesn't have a much better win rate, so it's also not very convincing, although it's sort of approaching 45%. And queen b6 actually has a winning rate, so maybe, you know, I didn't cover it much this recording, but maybe it's worth looking into. So after f3 you can play g6, which is the sort of Gurgenitsa type system, and let's just look at the most natural developing move, which is knight c3, and then bishop g7 occurs, and the most common move in the database is bishop e3. In my opinion, this is not very ambitious, because black can actually apply a lot of pressure here. So for example, black can take and take, and then play for e5, like in the accepted variation. And after, let's say, knight f3, black can take and sort of has this wide open bishop. So I think black definitely has some good play in this variation. You know, so maybe it's worth playing this if yeah, as you can see, bishop e3, oh no, it's bishop e3 actually has a better win rate for white, but only because people don't know how to play against it. Yeah, as you can see, e5 has a strong win rate here, but yeah, it's a small sample size. Anyway, there's also knight f6 here, but this runs into the same problem again with e5. At least you have knight d5, which is a slightly better square than in the other variations, but it's not very convincing in my opinion. So maybe try going for e5 here. This would be, I think this would be actually good for black. So, I mean, you can see the engine also likes this. Yeah, I think this is fine for black. Right, but the most challenging approach here is if white doesn't go for bishop e3, which is unchallenging, but e5. And the reason this is good is because, first of all, the most common move here is e6, which you can see once again has a good win rate for white. And this is just bad. I see this, it's common, but it's misguided because the bishop is completely useless now. And after something like f4, it's just completely biting on granite. So while it's already better, maybe black has some counterplay here with c5, but it's dubious what black can actually achieve here, in my opinion. Here's an interesting move. I don't know why this is so common, but here it gives h5 as a move. So after f4, the knight actually goes here. So it's very creative in development, but it's actually not too different from the main line. Because the main line here, and this is what is played in the master games, well, in the 4 out of 10 master games, is f6. And this is a bit ugly, a bit, you know, it doesn't look right, but it's necessary to just pressure this pawn chain. Most common choice here is, of course, f4. Black has difficulty developing. One try here is knight h6. White develops naturally with knight f3. Black can try development with bishop g4. Bishop e2 is also a move here. That also seems natural, and black can castle short, and white also castles, but it's still not entirely clear how do we apply pressure on this pawn chain, you know? If we just take now, they can just solidify, so that wouldn't be a good move. You know, there's some moves like knight here, which might be effective, and this position might be fine objectively, but and there are even some master games here, but I don't really see how black is hoping to get an advantage out of the opening, because if you watch opening videos, you don't want an equal position from the opening. You're probably looking to get an advantage out of the opening. Yeah, if we just take, for example, I don't know what this is going to give, but I don't think it's great for, I think it's great for black. Okay, it's not loading at all. But it wasn't one of the top moves, so I assume it's at least +1 or something. But yeah, I don't really see what the point is. And I gave you an example game. I don't remember what happens in this game. Let's try to have a look. Actually, one that okay, this is a very weird move order. Okay, it's like a modern defense. I guess, I think, yeah, white blunders here. White plays h6, which just allows black to take advantage of this pin here and just take here and take here with the bishop. So yeah, they just straight up blunder a pawn. Yeah, take once, take twice. And yeah, okay, well, black can be better if white just blunders their whole entire strong pawn chain in the center. Yeah, so the only lines that I would really recommend is, you know, this I mean, you can recommend this counter Gambit, because in 30% of games people did play they take both pawns. So I guess it's playable, I guess. And e6 is obviously also recommendable, and e5 if you know what you're doing, you know, just accepting it and playing e5. Okay, so I see you've been going for over an hour, and I've also split it into 2 parts accidentally, because the other because I accidentally got rid of the recording overlay. So I hope this video, anyone will still be watching this video to this length, but I hope I was able to cover all the important moves, and obviously I'm not that high rated. I'm only 2100 leeches, so that's like yeah, that's maybe 1600 in real life or something. I don't know, but yeah, I'm obviously not the best player who has knowledge of all of these lines, but I try to look at what has a good win rate, what do the masters play, and what's sort of maybe a strong attempt to win for both sides, white and black. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and let's see if I ever have enough time to make another video. Goodbye.